July 4th poses thornier questions for Christians this year than in the past. Things are thornier because religion and politics are mixed up in a new way. Last January 6th, one of the rioters charged into the Capitol to stop the certification of the election, carrying a sign that said, "Jesus saves." What has Jesus saves got to do with seizing the Capitol building? Since the early 1970s, there has been a movement called dominionism. In a nutshell, it's an attempt by some Christians to impose the kingdom of God by force of law. The Karl Marx of dominionism, also known as Reconstructionism, also known as Christian nationalism, was R.J. Rushdoony. In the 1970s, he called for fundamentalist Christians to seize the reins of political power. Around the same time, the Ayatollah Khomeini was calling for Islamic fundamentalists to do the same thing in Iran. That Jesus saves rioter didn't come out of nowhere. In a 2006 sermon, Ohio pastor Ron Parsley said, quote, "Now this revolution is not for the temperate. This revolution, that's what it is not for the timid and the weak, but for the brave and strong who step over the line and become disciples of Christ." The secular media never like it when I say this, so let me say it twice. Man your battle stations, ready your weapons. I came to incite a riot. Man your battle stations, lock and load. End quote. Ron Luce runs a Christian youth organization called Battle Cry. At a rock concert, Luce told 25,000 teens, "This is war, and Jesus invites us to get into the action." Well, the new Christian dominion movement has its roots in the distant past. So let's look at some history. Most people assume that religions have always been murderously intolerant and have caused violence from the beginning. Well, there is some truth to that, but not as much as you might think. In her study of so-called religious violence, Fields of Blood, Professor Karen Armstrong finds religion's hands are not clean, but religion is usually more of a pretext than a cause of violence. The so-called wars of religion in the 16th century were ostensibly between Catholics and Protestants, but it turns out there were plenty of Protestants fighting on the Catholic side and plenty of Catholics fighting on the Protestant side. It was more about turf disputes between new states as the Holy Roman Empire came apart. In 1415, when the English army charged into the Battle of Agincourt shouting, "Cry God for Harry, for England and St. George," the French army, charging from the opposite direction, was shouting, "Cry God for the Dauphin, for France and St. John." So what's the real role of religion? When humankind took up agriculture around 10,000 BC, we established domination systems so that the elite could own land and compel people to farm it. Religion provided a justification for that dominance. The pharaohs, kings, and Caesars of antiquity were all gods or sons of gods or consorts of gods. Statues of Augustus bore the inscription, "Augustus Caesar, the Son of God." Religious institutions supported the wealthy and the powerful. Priests were cheerleaders for monarchs. All religions existed to serve the king until around 1300 BC, when Moses introduced a god of slaves, who said to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Moses freed his people from Egyptian tyranny and established an egalitarian society of shepherds with very little political structure of any kind. But when the Israelites took up farming, they wanted a political order like their farming neighbors had. They wanted a king. That's what lies behind today's lesson from Samuel. The rest of the Old Testament is a running argument between the monarchist, who saw the king as the son and agent of God, and the anti-monarchist prophets, who saw the king as a usurper and exploiter. By Jesus' day, Israel had broken apart and been conquered by Rome. Among Jews, there were Roman collaborators who supported the empire. There were insurrectionists called zealots who wanted to kick the Romans out and restore the Jewish monarchy. Others, called Essenes, wanted to escape both factions and live in isolated communes. All these groups wanted Jesus on their side. The best biblical scholars, both liberal and conservative, say Jesus refused to join any of those parties. He wanted a revolution too, but he didn't trust political, economic, or military power to make things better. Instead, he called for a spiritual revolution of love lived out in the world. That's why early Christians kept their distance from the empire. St. Paul insisted in Colossians and Ephesians that our allegiance is to Christ over any powers and principalities of this present world. In the 2nd century, Hippolytus of Rome forbade Christians to even serve as magistrates or soldiers. Early Christians were martyred, not for their religious beliefs, but for their refusal to burn a pinch of incense to show their loyalty to Caesar. The Emperor Constantine then made Christianity the state religion, and that was confusing. By the Middle Ages, Christianity was so mixed up with the feudal system, you couldn't tell one from the other. When feudalism and medieval Christianity fell apart, they fell apart together at the same time. Since then, we've argued over the proper relation between church and state. They had not existed as separate institutions before, but now they did. So what's the relationship? Some places had state-sponsored religions, but the United States opted for religious liberty. We never precluded religious people from expressing a moral perspective in civic conversations about justice and mercy. Religious voices spoke out on slavery, temperance, women's suffrage, war and peace, workers' rights, segregation, nutrition insecurity. That's gone on from the very beginning. The First Amendment doesn't prohibit religious voices in the public square, it protects them. But it doesn't conscience the government imposing a religion or a religion imposing a government. Then, in the 1930s, things changed. Nationalism was born. Progressive politics and pragmatic philosophy combined in a new ideology to unify the people. They thought religions divided people, so they insisted religion should be a private individual, take it or leave it personal choice. But pledging our ultimate allegiance to the nation would bring us together. What united us and was expected of every citizen was American nationalism. John Dewey, who gave us the decimal system, was American nationalism's principal author. He saw that to evoke the kind of commitment religions had once done, nationalism needed to assume the trappings of religion to become the new religion. So there came to be nationalist rituals like raising and lowering the flag, national creeds like the Pledge of Allegiance, national hymns, national holy days, national sacred documents displayed to be reverenced, national monuments and holy sites, national saints like Lincoln and the Founding Fathers, and national martyrs like the war dead. We'd had some of this before, but in the 1930s, Americanism became the core belief system expected of all Americans. Other nationalisms were surging around the world at the same time, especially Spain, Italy, Germany, and Japan. In the 1930s, the America First Committee was formed, espousing American nationalism and appeasement of fascist aggression in Europe. A Christian dominionist of our time, Pat Buchanan, praises the American First Committee of the 1930s and says we should model our policies on their, quote, monumental achievements, end quote. Well, religion made a comeback in the 1950s with revivalism, but in the context of modern nationalism, some revivalists were quite cozy with politicians who wielded the real power. Billy Graham fawned over and served various political leaders through the decades, most of all Richard Nixon, whom he regarded as the model of a godly leader. Then Watergate disillusioned him about cloaking political power with the mantle of religion. Graham apologized for his mistakes, and when Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and James Dobson took evangelical Christianity full tilt into the political arena, Billy Graham would have no part of it. All this leaves us with 3 points from history that set the stage for today's challenge. 1, politics has superseded religion as our primary allegiance. Even in churches, people will get along despite disagreements over religious belief, but political differences are a deal breaker for a relationship. 2, religious leaders who deliver their people for political agendas driven by competition for wealth and power are relegating religion to the role it played as a pep squad for the powerful in ancient Egypt, Assyria, and Rome. 3, Christian nationalism is directly at odds not just with the Constitution, but with the religion of Moses and Jesus. So, can Christians love their country and still be Christians? I acknowledge and respect the Christian tradition that is leery of nations, the Amish, Mennonites, Brethren, and other separatists. But I notice that since the 1930s, when push comes to shove, many of those folks will choose their nationalism over their religious faith. So I offer instead some more moderate guidance from St. Augustine. He used the metaphor of 2 cities occupying the same space, the earthly city and the heavenly city. The earthly city is governed by self-interest, greed, and power. The heavenly city is governed by love. We easily see the earthly city in government, but it's in the church too. We see the heavenly city in the church when it's faithful, but it also makes surprising guest appearances in government. Augustine said government couldn't create paradise, but it could keep order and do a bit of good. He taught that Christians ought to be good citizens, to do their duty, and whenever possible, to infuse a little love into the world, even in the affairs of state. But for Christians to try to impose the kingdom of God by way of government was futile and would only corrupt Christians because that's what power does. Power politics is inherently at odds with the kingdom of love. So can Christians love their country? Yes and no. If we mean a 1930s or 2020s brand of America First, making nationalism a religion and treating America like a god, the answer is no. Christian nationalism is an oxymoron. Charging into the Capitol with the Jesus Saves sign is a sacrilege. The powers and principalities of this present world weaponize God for their own purposes. That betrays the gospel of Christ. But on the other hand, love is the first and great commandment. Loving our homeland is part of that. Think of the Jewish exiles in Psalm 137. If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. 2,300 years later, Sir Walter Scott echoed the psalmist. Breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself hath said, this is my own, my native land, whose heart hath ne'er within him burned, as home his footsteps he hath turned. Just so, an American Christian loves America. But what do we love, and how do we love it? 4 things. 1, we love the land, our native land. America is a place. America is purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. The song says, I love thy rocks and rills, thy woods and templed hills. To love America is to see and appreciate it. Loving America is seeing and appreciating the place, but it's more than appreciation. It's stewardship of the land, the waters, the air, the wildlife, the climate. We cannot love America and destroy it at the same time. Loving America includes a faithful commitment to the beauty and vitality of the place. 2, America is also the people who live here. So crown thy good with brotherhood. Loving America means loving the people here, people of all races, religions, and gender identities. It means loving people who are like us and people who are different. It means loving liberals and conservatives, Black Lives Matter protesters and right-wingers charging into the Capitol. We can passionately disagree, but still find some spark of good in each other and wish each other well. There's a particularly crucial part of loving our fellow Americans these days: compassion for those in economic and social despair. Here's why. Our time is soaked in rage. One young Colorado man said he supported a left-wing presidential candidate because he was loud and angry. In 2016, supporters of that loud and angry left-wing candidate in the primaries voted for a right-wing candidate in the general election because he was loud and angry. More and more, we vote for rage, regardless of policies. Journalist Chris Hedges says, stories of rage are first stories of despair. He quotes Fritz Stern's book on the rise of fascism in 1930s Germany. Theirs was a resentment born of loneliness. Their one desire was for a new faith, a new community of believers, a world of fixed standards and no doubts, a new national religion that would bind all Germans together. Despair and loneliness underlie the extremism of today as it did German extremism then. Certainly, extremists have to be restrained in their violence, sedition, and crimes. But condemning them as ignorant deplorables only makes things worse. New York Times journalist Charlie Walser has studied internet radicalization. He says conspiracy theorists are usually lonely people who feel disrespected. They buy into QAnon in a desperate attempt to connect with somebody. At a bishop's meeting with House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn last week, he told us the story of a young veteran who missed military camaraderie. So he joined the Proud Boys, not because he was a white supremacist, but because he was lonely. Loving America means caring for those folks and creating a community where they can find a place. 3, we love the heart of America, our moral identity. America's moral identity is as a democratic society. To love America is to love our core values of liberty and justice. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. Many people today, both left and right, are all too eager to curtail the liberty of those who disagree with them. They don't just want to defeat them in elections, they want to lock them up, as they do in Russia, China, and Myanmar. I understand why people wanted to see Derek Chauvin convicted, but some were angry that his lawyer defended him. Many who love America in a nationalist way are all too eager to strip America of its moral identity. Loving America means loving freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to vote, and due process of law. The 4th point is that we love the real America, not a fantasy wonderland. We don't pretend slavery, lynching, and segregation didn't happen. We don't forget the Sand Creek Massacre here in Colorado, the Tulsa Race Massacre, Red Summer of 1919, the internment of Japanese Americans, and the burning of San Jose's Chinatown. We don't forget the 20,000 Nazis at Madison Square Garden in 1939. We face the truth of our story, with both its glory and its shame, knowing that we are all sinners and all saints. We acknowledge both parts of our story. Then we forgive, make amends, and reconcile. That's how love works. We don't claim to be perfect. We sing, America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. To sum up, we love America as it is, a nation that often gets it right and sometimes gets it wrong, and out of love, we strive to mend its every flaw. We love the land, democracy, and the people, black and white, left and right, Christian, Jew, and Muslim, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all.